Picture this. It's 11:42 p.m. on May 20th, 1967, and Charlie Redbird is sitting on his front porch at Shag Lake, Saskatchewan, when suddenly the entire night sky explodes with light as a massive fireball, the size of a school bus, comes screaming out of the heavens and crashes into the lake with such tremendous force that windows shatter for miles around. Within hours, Canadian military vehicles are swarming the remote area. Soldiers are setting up a perimeter around the crash site, and local residents are being told to evacuate immediately due to dangerous radiation levels. For the next 3 weeks, teams of men in hazmat suits work around the clock to recover something from the bottom of Shag Lake, something so important that the Canadian government has kept every document related to this incident classified for over half a century, making it the most significant UFO crash cover-up in North American history outside of Roswell itself. This is the story of Canada's Roswell, and what I'm about to tell you is going to blow your mind, because this isn't some conspiracy theory or urban legend. This is a documented incident involving multiple government agencies, dozens of witnesses, and physical evidence that was recovered and hidden by the Canadian military. The Shag Lake UFO crash of 1967 represents one of the most thoroughly covered up extraterrestrial incidents in modern history, and the details that have emerged over the decades paint a picture of a massive government conspiracy to hide proof of alien visitation from the Canadian people. Let me take you back to May 20th, 1967, in the remote wilderness of northern Saskatchewan, where Shag Lake sits like a hidden jewel, surrounded by thousands of square miles of boreal forest, pristine wilderness that stretches to the horizon in every direction. This was the heart of the Canadian bush country, a place where the nearest town was over 100 kilometers away, and the only residents were a handful of indigenous families who had been living off the land for generations. Charlie Redbird was a 54-year-old Cree trapper and guide who had spent his entire life in the Shag Lake area, learning the traditional ways from his father and grandfather before him. Charlie knew every rock, every tree, every animal trail within 50 miles of his cabin, and he'd seen just about everything the northern wilderness could throw at a man. Blizzards that could kill you in minutes, forest fires that burned for weeks, wildlife encounters that would terrify city folks. But nothing in Charlie's 5 decades of life in the bush had prepared him for what he was about to witness. Charlie's cabin sat on a small rise about 200 meters from the eastern shore of Shag Lake, a pristine body of water that stretched roughly 3 kilometers from north to south and about 2 kilometers from east to west. The lake was deep. Local Cree legends said it was bottomless, though Charlie figured it was probably at least 100 meters deep in the center based on his years of fishing those waters. On the evening of May 20th, Charlie had finished his usual routine of checking his trap lines and preparing for the next day's work. The weather had been unusually warm for late May, with daytime temperatures reaching into the mid-20s Celsius and clear skies that stretched endlessly in all directions. Charlie had eaten his dinner of fresh lake trout and bannock bread, and he was sitting on his front porch enjoying his evening pipe while listening to the sounds of the wilderness settling into nighttime rhythms. At exactly 11:42 p.m., Charlie would remember the time precisely because he just checked his pocket watch to decide whether to go inside for the night. The entire world changed in an instant. The first thing Charlie noticed was a sound unlike anything he'd ever heard before. It started as a low rumbling that seemed to come from everywhere at once, vibrating through the ground under his feet and making the wooden boards of his porch shake like they were in an earthquake. But this wasn't earthquake country, and Charlie had never felt anything like the deep thrumming vibration that was building in intensity with each passing second. Charlie stood up from his chair and looked around, trying to identify the source of the strange sound. That's when he noticed that all the normal night sounds had stopped completely. No insects chirping, no owls calling, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. The entire forest had gone dead silent, except for that ominous rumbling that was getting louder and more intense by the moment. Then Charlie looked up at the sky and saw something that made his blood run cold. Coming from the northeast at incredible speed was a ball of fire that looked like someone had torn a piece of the sun and hurled it toward Earth. The object was massive. Charlie later estimated it was at least as big as a school bus, maybe bigger, and it was glowing with an intense white-hot light that turned the night into day across the entire area. But this wasn't a meteor or any other natural phenomenon that Charlie had ever seen. The object was moving in a controlled trajectory, following a path that was too precise and deliberate to be random. It was also moving much slower than a meteor would move, giving Charlie time to observe details that would be impossible to see during a normal meteorite event. The fireball was surrounded by what looked like electrical discharge, with blue and green lightning crackling across its surface in patterns that reminded Charlie of the northern lights, but concentrated into a tight sphere around the central object. The light was so intense that Charlie had to shield his eyes, but he couldn't look away from the incredible spectacle unfolding above his head. As the object passed directly overhead, Charlie could feel heat radiating from it, despite its altitude of what must have been at least 1,000 meters. The rumbling sound had become a roar that shook every building, every tree, every rock in the area. Charlie's cabin windows were rattling so violently that he was afraid they might shatter. The object continued its controlled descent toward Shag Lake, and Charlie realized with growing amazement and terror that whatever this thing was, it was going to impact the water directly in front of his property. He had a front row seat to what was obviously the most extraordinary event in the history of northern Saskatchewan. The impact occurred at approximately 11:45 p.m., just 3 minutes after Charlie had first spotted the fireball. The object struck the center of Shag Lake with such tremendous force that it created a waterspout that shot hundreds of meters into the air, followed by a shockwave that knocked Charlie off his feet and shattered every window in his cabin. The sound of the impact was indescribable, like thunder in a freight train and an explosion all happening at the same time, magnified beyond anything Charlie had ever experienced. The ground shook so violently that Charlie thought the earth itself might split open, and the shockwave traveled through the lake and surrounding forest like a physical thing, snapping trees and sending wildlife fleeing in every direction. After the initial impact, an eerie silence settled over the area. The fireball had disappeared beneath the surface of the lake, but the water was still churning and steaming as if something incredibly hot was sitting on the bottom. Charlie could see strange lights flickering beneath the surface, not reflections of anything above the water, but actual lights coming from somewhere deep in the lake. Charlie stood up slowly, his ears ringing from the tremendous noise of the impact, and surveyed the damage to his property. Every window in his cabin was broken, and several large trees near the shoreline had been knocked down by the shock wave. But the most disturbing thing was the smell. A metallic, ozone-like odor that reminded Charlie of lightning strikes, but stronger and more persistent. As Charlie watched, the surface of the lake began to glow with a faint greenish light that pulsed rhythmically, like a giant heartbeat coming from beneath the water. The glow was strongest at the center of the lake, where the object had impacted, but it extended outward in ripples that reached almost to the shoreline. Charlie spent the rest of that night sitting on his damaged porch, watching the mysterious lights beneath the lake and trying to process what he had witnessed. He'd lived his entire life in the wilderness, and he'd seen meteor showers, the northern lights, forest fires, and every other natural phenomenon that occurred in the northern Saskatchewan bush. But nothing in his experience could explain what had just happened at Shag Lake. As dawn approached on May 21st, Charlie noticed that the greenish glow beneath the lake was gradually fading, but it didn't disappear completely. Even in full daylight, there was still a subtle luminescence, visible beneath the water's surface, concentrated in the area where the object had impacted. Charlie decided he needed to investigate further. He launched his small boat and paddled out to the center of the lake, where he could see that the water was much warmer than it should have been for late May in northern Saskatchewan. When he held his hand in the water, it felt almost like bath water, which was impossible given that most northern lakes didn't warm up to comfortable swimming temperatures until late June or early July. But the most disturbing discovery came when Charlie tried to use his depth finder to locate the object on the bottom of the lake. According to his equipment, the lake was much deeper in the center than it had ever been before. The depth finder registered over 200 meters before losing signal entirely, which meant that either the object had created a massive crater when it impacted, or it had somehow passed completely through the lake bottom and continued into the earth below. Charlie also noticed that his compass was spinning wildly when he was in the center of the lake, unable to maintain a steady bearing on magnetic north. This suggested that whatever was sitting on the bottom of Shag Lake was generating a powerful magnetic field that was interfering with normal navigation equipment. After returning to shore, Charlie examined the damage to his cabin more carefully and discovered that the broken glass had unusual properties. Instead of the normal clear fragments you'd expect from shattered windows, the glass pieces had a faint iridescent quality, almost like they'd been exposed to some kind of radiation that had changed their molecular structure. Charlie spent the morning of May 21st trying to decide what to do about what he had witnessed. He had no telephone or radio at his remote cabin, and the nearest RCMP detachment was over 100 kilometers away in La Ronge. But Charlie knew that whatever had crashed into Shag Lake was something that authorities needed to know about. Charlie decided to make the long journey to La Ronge to report the incident. He loaded his supplies into his truck and began the difficult drive over logging roads and wilderness tracks that connected his property to the main highway system. The journey would take most of the day, but Charlie felt obligated to report what he had seen to someone in authority. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to Charlie, his sighting was not the only report of unusual activity in northern Saskatchewan on the night of May 20. The North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, had detected an unidentified object on radar entering Canadian airspace from the direction of the North Pole at approximately 11. The object had been tracked moving at extremely high speed across northern Manitoba and into Saskatchewan before disappearing from radar screens in the vicinity of Shag Lake. NORAD had immediately notified the Canadian Department of National Defense about the radar contact, and by early morning on May 20, military officials were already analyzing the tracking data and trying to determine what kind of aircraft or missile could have been responsible for the radar signature they had observed. The radar data showed some very unusual characteristics that didn't match any known aircraft or natural phenomenon. The object had been moving at speeds exceeding Mach 3 when it first appeared on radar, but it had gradually decelerated as it approached the Shag Lake area, suggesting controlled flight rather than a ballistic trajectory. The object had also demonstrated the ability to change altitude and direction in ways that would be impossible for conventional aircraft or missiles. Most puzzling of all, the radar signature had shown characteristics consistent with a metallic object of substantial size, much larger than any aircraft known to be operating in the area. The object appeared to be at least 30 meters in length based on its radar cross-section, which would make it larger than any military aircraft in the Canadian inventory. By the time Charlie Redbird reached the RCMP detachment in La Ronge on the afternoon of May 21st, Canadian military authorities were already aware that something significant had occurred in the Shag Lake area. Charlie's eyewitness account provided crucial ground truth information that correlated perfectly with the radar tracking data, giving military officials confidence that they were dealing with a genuine crash of an unknown aircraft. Constable Robert McLeod was the duty officer at the La Ronge RCMP detachment when Charlie arrived to report his sighting. McLeod was a 12-year veteran of the RCMP, who had dealt with everything from domestic disputes to wilderness search and rescue operations. But Charlie's account was unlike anything in his experience. "Sir, I need to report an aircraft crash at Shag Lake," Charlie told Constable McLeod as he walked into the detachment. "Something big came down last night, hit the water hard enough to shake the ground for miles around." McLeod took out his incident report forms and began recording Charlie's statement. As Charlie described the fireball, the tremendous impact, the mysterious lights beneath the lake, and the unusual properties of the water and debris, McLeod realized that this was far beyond anything the local RCMP detachment was equipped to handle. "Mr. Redbird, I'm going to need you to repeat this entire account while I record it," McLeod said. "And then I'm going to have to contact some people who are going to want to hear this story directly from you." McLeod's initial report to RCMP headquarters in Regina was immediately forwarded to the Canadian Department of National Defense, where it was combined with the NORAD radar data to create a comprehensive picture of what had occurred at Shag Lake. Within hours, the incident had been classified at the highest levels of the Canadian government, and emergency response protocols were activated. By the evening of May 21st, less than 24 hours after the crash, advanced teams from the Canadian military were already en route to the Shag Lake area. The operation was designated Project North Star, and it would become one of the largest military recovery operations ever conducted in Canadian territory during peacetime. The first military personnel to arrive at Shag Lake were members of the Canadian Forces Nuclear Biological Chemical NBC Defense Unit, equipped with radiation detection equipment and hazmat protective gear. Their mission was to determine whether the crashed object posed any immediate environmental or health hazards to the surrounding area. Captain James Morrison was the commanding officer of the NBC team, a career military officer with extensive experience in dealing with aircraft crashes involving experimental or classified technology. Morrison had been briefed about the radar data and Charlie Redbird's eyewitness account, but nothing had prepared him for what his team discovered when they began their initial survey of the Shag Lake area. The radiation readings around the lake were unlike anything Morrison had ever encountered. The water itself was registering significant levels of gamma radiation, but the radiation pattern didn't match anything produced by conventional nuclear materials. The radiation seemed to be concentrated in specific frequency bands that were characteristic of exotic matter or unknown energy sources. "Base, this is Morrison," the captain radioed back to headquarters after his team had completed their initial survey. "We've got confirmed radiation readings across the entire lake area, but the signature doesn't match any known isotopes. We're dealing with something outside our normal parameters." The radiation readings were strong enough to require immediate evacuation of any civilians in the area. Charlie Redbird was relocated to temporary housing in La Ronge, and his cabin was declared off-limits pending further investigation. The entire Shag Lake area was cordoned off with a security perimeter extending 10 kilometers in all directions. Over the next several days, the military operation at Shag Lake expanded rapidly. Engineers arrived to construct temporary buildings and equipment storage facilities. Communications specialists established secure communication links with military headquarters in Ottawa. Most importantly, deepwater recovery specialists arrived with sophisticated sonar equipment and remote-operated vehicles capable of locating and retrieving objects from the bottom of the lake. Dr. Sarah Chen was a marine archaeologist and deepwater recovery expert who had been contracted by the Canadian government to assist with underwater operations. Chen had extensive experience recovering aircraft wreckage from lakes and rivers across Canada, but the Shag Lake operation was unlike anything in her previous assignments. The sonar readings we're getting from the lake bottom were extraordinary, Dr. Chen reported to Captain Morrison after her team had completed their initial underwater survey. "There's definitely a large metallic object down there, but it's not sitting on the bottom like you'd expect from an aircraft crash. It appears to have penetrated deep into the lake bed, possibly 20 or 30 meters below the sediment layer." The sonar data revealed an object that was approximately 30 meters in length and roughly cylindrical in shape, consistent with the radar signature that NORAD had tracked. But the object's position beneath the lake bed suggested that it had impacted with tremendous force, much greater than would be expected from a conventional aircraft crash. More puzzling still, the sonar readings showed that the object was generating its own acoustic signals, regular pulses of sound that were being transmitted through the water and into the surrounding rock formations. The pulses followed a complex pattern that suggested some kind of communication or navigation system was still active within the crashed object. Dr. Chen's team spent several days mapping the exact position and orientation of the object before beginning recovery operations. The plan was to use specially designed drilling equipment to create access shafts down to the object's location, then use remote-operated vehicles to examine the wreckage and recover any salvageable components. The drilling operations began on May 26, 6 days after the initial crash. The work was extremely difficult because the object was located beneath layers of lake sediment and solid rock that required specialized equipment to penetrate. The drilling crews worked in shifts around the clock, using equipment that had been flown in from mining operations in northern Ontario. As the drilling progressed, the teams encountered increasingly unusual conditions. The rocks surrounding the object showed signs of having been subjected to extreme heat and pressure, with crystal formations that were unlike anything in the normal geological record for the area. Some of the rock samples contained metallic inclusions that couldn't be identified using standard analytical techniques. Most disturbing of all, the drilling teams began experiencing equipment failures that seemed to be related to electromagnetic interference coming from the buried object. Drill bits would become magnetized and lose their effectiveness. Electronic equipment would malfunction randomly, and radio communications would be disrupted by bursts of static that followed the same rhythmic pattern as the acoustic pulses detected by the sonar equipment. On May 30th, 10 days after the crash, the drilling teams finally reached the object itself. The first remote-operated vehicle to make contact with the wreckage transmitted images that left the recovery team stunned and speechless. The object was clearly not of human origin. The hull of the craft was made from a material that appeared to be a single piece of seamless metal with no visible joints, welds, or construction details. The surface had a mirror-like quality that reflected the lights from the remote vehicle, but the reflection showed unusual properties that suggested the material was composed of elements not found in the periodic table. More significantly, portions of the craft appeared to be intact despite the tremendous force of the impact. There were areas where the hull had been breached, but other sections showed no damage at all, as if the material was capable of absorbing and redistributing impact energy in ways that defied conventional physics. Dr. Chen directed the remote vehicle to investigate the breached sections of the hull, hoping to gain access to the craft's interior. What they found inside would change everything. The interior of the craft contained technology that was clearly far in advance of anything produced by human civilization. There were control panels with symbols and interfaces that bore no resemblance to any known writing system or technological design. There were also what appeared to be seats or workstations designed for beings that were humanoid in shape, but smaller in stature than typical humans. Most significantly, there were areas of the craft that appeared to contain biological materials, organic substances that might have been the remains of the craft's occupants. These materials were in various states of preservation, some appearing to be almost intact, while others had been severely damaged by the crash impact. "Base, this is Chen." Dr. Chen radioed to the surface command post. "We've confirmed that this is not a human-built aircraft. Repeat, this is definitely not of terrestrial origin. We're going to need specialists in xenobiology and advanced materials science to properly analyze what we're seeing down here." The discovery that the Shag Lake crash involved an extraterrestrial craft sent shockwaves through the Canadian government. Prime Minister Lester Pearson was personally briefed on the situation, and emergency meetings were held at the highest levels of government to determine how to handle this unprecedented situation. The decision was made to classify the entire Shag Lake operation under the Official Secrets Act, making it illegal for anyone involved in the recovery to discuss any aspect of the incident. All personnel were required to sign non-disclosure agreements that carried severe criminal penalties for violations. The recovery operation continued for another 2 weeks, with teams working to extract as much material as possible from the crashed craft. The work was extremely dangerous because of the radiation exposure and the unstable condition of the wreckage. But scientists and military personnel were determined to recover every possible piece of evidence. The biological materials found within the craft were carefully preserved and transported to secure facilities for analysis. The technological components were studied by teams of engineers and scientists who were trying to understand the principles behind the craft's advanced propulsion and control systems. The materials science analysis revealed that the craft's hull was composed of metallic elements that exhibited properties unlike anything in terrestrial metallurgy. The material was lighter than aluminum but stronger than steel, and it seemed to be capable of changing its molecular structure in response to external stimuli like heat, pressure, or electromagnetic fields. Perhaps most remarkably, some of the technological components appeared to be still functional despite the crash damage. There were devices that generated their own power through unknown means, and control systems that responded to human interaction in ways that suggested some form of artificial intelligence. The xenobiological analysis of the organic materials found within the craft provided the most stunning revelations of all. The materials were definitely biological in origin, but they showed genetic structures that were unlike anything found in terrestrial life forms. The beings that had operated this craft were clearly not human, though they appeared to share some basic biological characteristics with Earth-based life. By mid-June 1967, the recovery operation at Shag Lake was declared complete. All visible traces of the crashed craft had been removed, and the site had been carefully restored to appear as natural as possible. The access shafts were filled in, the temporary buildings were dismantled, and the military personnel were withdrawn from the area. Charlie Redbird was allowed to return to his cabin, but he was required to sign additional non-disclosure agreements and was warned that he would face severe legal consequences if he discussed the incident with anyone. The Canadian government provided compensation for the damage to his property and offered to relocate him to a different area if he preferred, but Charlie chose to remain at Shag Lake. The official cover story for the Shag Lake operation was that a classified military aircraft had crashed during a test flight, and that the recovery operation had been necessary to prevent sensitive technology from falling into foreign hands. This explanation satisfied media inquiries and public curiosity, while keeping the true nature of the incident completely secret. The physical evidence recovered from the Shag Lake crash was transported to secure facilities across Canada and the United States for further analysis. Some materials went to the National Research Council facilities in Ottawa, while others were shared with American researchers under classified technology exchange agreements. The study of the Shag Lake materials would continue for decades, leading to technological advances in metallurgy, electronics, and propulsion systems that would eventually find their way into civilian applications. Many of the technological innovations that emerged in the 1970s and 1980s, from advanced computer components to new aerospace materials, can be traced back to insights gained from the analysis of the extraterrestrial technology recovered from Shag Lake. But the most important discoveries from the Shag Lake incident remained highly classified. The confirmation that extraterrestrial beings were visiting Earth and that their technology was recoverable and analyzable represented information that government officials believed was too sensitive to share with the public. Over the years that followed the Shag Lake incident, similar crashes and recoveries occurred at other locations across Canada and the United States. These incidents were all handled using protocols and procedures that had been developed during the Shag Lake operation, creating a systematic program for the recovery and analysis of extraterrestrial technology. Charlie Redbird lived at Shag Lake for another 23 years after the crash, until his death in 1990. During those years, he occasionally spoke with trusted friends about what he had witnessed, but he never broke his official silence about the government cover-up. Charlie's accounts of the incident were preserved by members of his family and eventually found their way to UFO researchers who recognized their historical significance. In the decades since the Shag Lake crash, other witnesses have come forward with information about the incident. Former military personnel involved in the recovery operation have provided details about the advanced technology that was recovered. Scientists who analyzed the materials have shared insights about the extraterrestrial origins of the craft and its occupants. The Canadian government has never officially acknowledged the extraterrestrial nature of the Shag Lake incident. All documents related to the crash remain classified under national security provisions, and requests for information under the Access to Information Act have been consistently denied. However, the gradual release of information through whistleblowers and former government employees has created a detailed picture of what really happened at Shag Lake, and the incident represents one of the most thoroughly documented cases of extraterrestrial technology recovery in modern history. The technological insights gained from the Shag Lake crash have had profound implications for human scientific and technological development. The advanced materials, propulsion systems, and energy generation techniques observed in the extraterrestrial craft have influenced research directions across multiple fields of science and engineering. More importantly, the Shag Lake incident provides concrete evidence that Earth has been visited by extraterrestrial civilizations, with technology far in advance of human capabilities. The craft that crashed into Shag Lake represented a level of technological sophistication that human civilization has not yet achieved, even more than 50 years later. The beings that operated the Shag Lake craft remain a mystery. The biological materials recovered from the crash provided some insights into their physical characteristics, but questions about their origin, motivations, and intentions remain unanswered. The incident represents just one data point in what appears to be an ongoing program of extraterrestrial observation and interaction with Earth. The cover-up of the Shag Lake incident reflects the same pattern of government secrecy that has characterized the handling of UFO incidents around the world. The decision to classify the crash and hide the evidence from the public was made by officials who believed that knowledge of extraterrestrial visitation would create panic and social disruption. Whether that decision was justified remains a matter of debate. The gradual revelation of information about incidents like Shag Lake suggests that the public is capable of handling the truth about extraterrestrial visitation without the catastrophic social consequences that government officials feared. The Shag Lake crash also raises important questions about the relationship between human civilization and the extraterrestrial intelligences that appear to be monitoring our planet. The advanced technology demonstrated by the crashed craft suggests that these beings have capabilities that far exceed human military and defensive systems. The fact that the craft crashed at all is itself puzzling. If extraterrestrial civilizations possess technology capable of interstellar travel, why would their craft be vulnerable to accidents or mechanical failures while operating in Earth's atmosphere? Some researchers have speculated that the Shag Lake crash might have been intentional, a way of providing human civilization with access to advanced technology that could accelerate our scientific and technological development. The recovery and analysis of extraterrestrial technology from incidents like Shag Lake may represent a form of controlled technology transfer, with extraterrestrial civilizations gradually introducing advanced concepts and capabilities to human researchers through carefully orchestrated incidents and recoveries. This hypothesis suggests that the apparent increase in UFO sightings and crashes during the 1940s and 1950s was not random, but rather represented a systematic program of technology sharing designed to help human civilization develop the scientific and technological capabilities necessary for eventual contact with extraterrestrial civilizations. The Shag Lake incident occurred during a period of intense UFO activity across North America. with numerous sightings and crashes reported throughout the night. This clustering of incidents suggests that extraterrestrial civilizations were conducting an extensive survey or research program focused on Earth during that time period. The choice of remote locations like Shag Lake for these incidents may reflect a deliberate strategy to minimize public exposure, while ensuring that government and military authorities would have access to the technology and evidence. The isolated location of Shag Lake allowed for a complete recovery operation without significant public attention or media coverage. The long-term classification of the Shag Lake incident also suggests that the recovered technology had significant national security implications. The advanced propulsion systems, materials science, and energy generation techniques observed in the extraterrestrial craft would have provided substantial military and economic advantages to any nation that could successfully reverse engineer and implement these technologies. The sharing of Shag Lake materials with American researchers under classified technology exchange agreements reflects the recognition that the implications of extraterrestrial technology extend beyond national boundaries. The advanced capabilities demonstrated by the crashed craft represent challenges and opportunities that affect all of human civilization. Today, more than 55 years after the Shag Lake crash, the incident remains one of the most significant and well-documented cases of extraterrestrial technology recovery in modern history. The physical evidence recovered from the crash, the testimonies of witnesses and participants, and the technological innovations that resulted from the analysis of the materials all point to the reality of extraterrestrial visitation and the ongoing cover-up of this information by government authorities. The Shag Lake incident demonstrates that the truth about extraterrestrial visitation is not a matter of belief or speculation, but rather a matter of documented historical fact. The crash occurred, the technology was recovered, the analysis was conducted, and the results were classified and hidden from public view. The gradual revelation of information about Shag Lake and similar incidents suggests that the era of government secrecy about extraterrestrial visitation may be coming to an end. As more witnesses come forward and more documents are leaked or declassified, it becomes increasingly difficult for government authorities to maintain the fiction that UFO incidents are explainable through conventional means. The technological insights gained from the Shag Lake crash have already had profound impacts on human scientific and technological development, even though the true source of these innovations has remained hidden from public view. As we continue to study and understand the advanced technologies demonstrated by extraterrestrial craft, we may be on the verge of revolutionary advances in energy generation, propulsion systems, and materials science that could transform human civilization. The story of Shag Lake reminds us that the universe is far more complex and populated than most people imagine. The crash of an extraterrestrial craft in a remote Canadian lake more than half a century ago provides concrete evidence that we are not alone, and that other intelligences are actively engaged with our planet and our civilization. Whether these extraterrestrial civilizations represent opportunities for beneficial contact and cooperation, or whether they pose potential threats that require careful monitoring and preparation, remains to be determined. But the reality of their presence and their advanced technological capabilities is no longer a matter of speculation. It is a documented fact that has been hidden from public view for more than 5 decades. The brave witnesses like Charlie Redbird who came forward to report what they saw, and the researchers and former government employees who have shared information about the cover-up, have ensured that the truth about Shag Lake and similar incidents continues to emerge despite official efforts to suppress this information. If you found this incredible story of Canada's hidden UFO crash as mind-blowing as I did when I first discovered the truth about Shag Lake, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because we've got tons more incredible government cover-ups and classified UFO incidents that have been hidden from the public for decades. From secret military recovery operations to leaked government documents that prove extraterrestrial visitation is real, there's a whole hidden history of alien contact that the authorities don't want you to know about. Drop a comment below if you think the Canadian government should finally declassify the Shag Lake files, and let me know what other classified UFO incidents you want us to investigate next.